it's my ball and I'm taking it home. That's the, you know, it was so. An audition is like any other encounter between people. It's not rule governed, and you can't make absolute laws about how you should behave, and different directors will have different they'll have different persona, and of course you would want, I suppose, to respond as naturally to that as you can, as yourself. In my experience, where I respond best to people who don't come in with sort of super high energy, desperate to make an impression, because it's an exhausting process for any director to audition. And there's something really refreshing when a person just walks in, says hello, talks as themselves, if that's the sort of audition that it is, or if not, just presents the work and is listening to you. You know, what do you like as a human being yourself if you meet another person? You like them to be open to you, you like them to listen to you, you like to feel that they're not sort of attempting to sell you something. And it's the same as a director meeting an actor. I think you just want to meet that person. And the actors that, in my experience, who function best in auditions are probably, I would say, aware of the fact that it's not a beauty contest for the best person. It's also about the unknowable thing that the director has in their mind that may or may not fit with what you're bringing in. So I don't think it should be thought about in terms of success or failure. It should be, I think it can be dignified, the process. And for me, the process is most dignified when it's just two human beings having a conversation and exploring something together. And of course, that doesn't take into account the fact that you may end up auditioning in front of people who aren't very nice, or who are, involved in their own trip, whatever that happens to be, and not projecting themselves, honestly. I think the best defense against that is still just to be yourself, react as normally as you can, and just do your work as you feel it. What you want to see is somebody who's committed to something, and who has thought about it, and you want to see something that makes sense. It doesn't, for a director, it doesn't have to be right. It doesn't have to be the way that the director sees that scene. I mean, the director should have a much more global sense of what's going on, and may have all sorts of ideas about what's really going to happen when you're playing that scene for real within the context of a bigger story. But what you're seeing back is, what you want to see back is something that makes sense, that is a choice, that is a kind of a thoughtful encounter with that material. Some of the best auditions I've done, or I've been involved in as a director, have ended up as conversations with an actor about ways in which you could do something. Brie auditioned for Room, Brie Larson auditioned for Room, and I auditioned a few very brilliant actresses. The one thing that was great about Brie was that as soon as she started working and I started suggesting and she started responding, it felt like two human beings in the process of trying to get to what it was that was most interesting about this stuff. And she was confident enough to commit to something, but then say, okay, now what do we think about that? And I mean, that was a very luxurious kind of context in which I had several hours with one really fine actress in an environment that was really nice. It wasn't the same pressurized, 10 minutes each situation that people will probably experience more at the beginning of their career, but the principle is still there. If the director offers you that conversation, then you should take it. And one of the things that they will be most impressed by, I think, is the capacity to hear and respond and contribute in that back and forth. If you're learning how to, waltz or something, there's a pattern, and it's practice. Rehearsal is not practice. You're not practicing doing the finished thing. It is a mistake, in my view, to try and finish things in rehearsal for film, because that excitement of discovery, some of that needs to be left for the shoot. I think work is better when the last of the discovery and in fact you never know. To be open to what may come out in the process of making something is a very smart strategy for a director. I would say that all directors are different, and I would also say that all actors are different. So I'll reverse this and say I don't have an approach to rehearsing with an actor. I have only an approach to rehearsing with that actor. And part of the skill in making something is to find a language that can unify a cast of people that may have very different approaches to how they perform. Some actors their process and their way of working is intensely psychological. Other actors is much more physical. Or other actors like to be involved in a kind of for some actors it's important for them to be part of a kind of a meta conversation about what's happening across the entire project. For other actors, that's death. They're much better, much more instinctual. They work much better when they just encounter the material, the exact moment, and respond to it. So I think you bring yourself, again, it's the same thing. You bring yourself as honestly as you can into the room. You try to get into tune with the director and the way that they might want to work. And you also try and respect the other actors in the way that they might work. And together, in that same spirit of discovery, you step forward in rehearsal into a conversation with the material, you know? I think that, you know, lightness on your feet, responsiveness, openness to what's happening, capacity to listen, the ability to watch your own responses and start to work with them. It's jazz. Like, there's no other way around this. There's no method. At least for me, there isn't a method. So again, for an actor, I think if you just breathe deeply, relax, don't walk in feeling that what you're supposed to do is arrive with everything right and ready, then I think it's going to work well. Now, there's a distinction, right, between actors will encounter all sorts of different kinds of work. Like if you get a small part in an ongoing TV drama, then none of this is going to, you know, you are going to turn up and you're going to know it, and what you're going to do is something within the band of kind of mainstream expectations. And I think that's, you know, that's the way it is, but you shouldn't be afraid to ask the director, you know, you shouldn't be afraid to ask for what you need in those circumstances. But that's very different to being the lead in something where you've got 2 or 3 weeks to work together and workshop it beforehand. But again, I think the only way to work is from a place of good faith and collaborativeness and self-respect. I've met actors who are very intellectual about what they do. In other words, they will I'll sit and talk to them about the film that we're making, and it will be a really interesting exchange of ideas about the overall meanings, and that will then filter back into the performance. And I've worked with superb actors who absolutely do not want to do that, and for whom that's a kind of passion killer, because it steps them outside of the kind of instinctual stuff that's where they find it. There are actors that can't work in other ways than the way they work, and sometimes that's difficult, and sometimes it's tricky, and sometimes that imposes itself on the whole process. So be it. If that actor is like, sometimes it's worth it, you know? Sometimes it's really worth it. You go through the pain with the actor, and everybody accepts that that's the way they work, and that's okay, right? Normally, and I've worked with actors who work in many different ways. Normally, the really, really good people that I've worked with, the people I've enjoyed working with most, and they tend to be also the people who we all love watching. Whatever mechanism it is that they use, okay? Let me frame this. Like, it's a day shooting, and somebody's got 3 days on the film or a week on the film. So it's a significant role, but it's not the lead, right? And your chances of having a lot of rehearsal time are pretty limited. You may get a day with them if they fly in for that chunk of the shoot, right? If you're lucky, you work with the key actors before you start. But let's just talk about working in the general run of things. Normally, the really good people, like there is an engine under that hood, under that bonnet, and sometimes it's a diesel. This is a really crude metaphor. Sometimes it's a diesel, sometimes it's a petrol, sometimes it's electric, right? But they will use those techniques. They will have their way of working, which we'll try and be sensitive to, right? Some actors want to be super quiet on the set, and you just, as a director, you get good at kind of recognizing what those needs are, okay? But they will dig deep in whatever way they dig. And they will, as a director, you can talk in ordinary language with them about what it is that's going on and why that's not working and why something else might. And they will use their process to get themselves there, right? With the leads, I personally like to open the bonnet and get into their way of working a bit, because I think that's where the glorious stuff comes, from challenging them within their process and acknowledging that and seeing whether you can push them out of the zone that they're comfortable in, you know? But on set, it's lovely to watch. Like, if everybody's a decent person, then you'll notice that actors will also help each other and give each other the sort of space and feedback that they need, you know? So, like, a really good example of that, again, just using room as an example, is if you've got a child on set, everybody's got to accommodate themselves to that, no matter how brilliant and famous they are. A child is a child. And the key thing about working with children is the same as being like dealing with children in life, which is whatever it takes. Sometimes it's, you know, begging, sometimes it's bribery, sometimes it's fun, sometimes it's you know, it's all these, and so nobody can be too precious about that. And it really taught me a lot about that, which is that nobody's method is so essential that they can't be a bit flexible about it. Just watch any actor working around a child, and you'll see that. But in a sort of in other contexts, generally speaking, you know, it's amazing. It's like a family. You know, people have different personalities, and they somehow have to operate around the same dinner table. So sometimes you'll find an actor who goes, that's not how I see it. I don't feel that way. And if they're the sort of, if their method is methody, and if it has to be sort of, those actors sometimes produce the most amazing work, but they can be sometimes the least light on their feet. And there, it's a sort of negotiation. But I think the important thing for an actor to understand is you can be wrong. Something can be true and also wrong, right? You can feel it really deeply. You can inhabit that, and it can be wrong. Because authenticity in the moment for the actor is not the only thing. There is a whole piece, right? So we don't think that dance is a lesser art form than drama, and yet the idea of somebody walking out on Swan Lake and saying, you know what, I don't actually feel like playing it as a swan tonight. I see it more as a kind of a cow. Well, you probably, you know, there's something really deep in that at that moment, but that's not the sculpture that we're making. So this dialectic between the free finding of truths and the dictates of the piece, that's where the greatness is, but it's also a negotiation. It's also a negotiation. And sometimes actors will find that really frustrating. And I would say the answer is not to just submit yourself to the piece, because that's the wrong kind of capitulation. But nor is the answer to just believe that your job is to entirely impose yourself on the piece. That's not the answer either. The answer is in the dance between those two things, and the director is part of that process, in, you know, as a sort of ultimate arbiter of what this whole thing means. Of course, I'd say that because I'm a director, but you know, I think it's true. Brie is a really good example, okay, because she has this hugely empathetic kind of organism that she's inhabiting. So she's emotionally absolutely open to the experiences of other characters. She can sort of take that person and that character and like run a simulator in some extraordinary way internally. And she will absolutely enter into it in the moment. She will, like, there were scenes where we just kept the camera rolling because I knew she was feeling it, and she would just, there's a scene in the movie where she breaks down, and that was but when you cut, she goes, oh, whoa, God, that was unbelievable. You know, and then she'll sit down, scratch her head, have a cup of tea, have a joke with Jake. So she is light on her feet. She is the ghost that can inhabit that character and then take herself back out. She can go right in and out very easily. That's probably the best thing you can cultivate as an actor. I would say that the people who have to stay in it all the time, it's really tough for them. It's pretty tough for everybody else as well. And in the end, I feel there's a kind of capacity to play, which a shapeshifter like Brie has, and which as a director I find so exciting. That's probably the thing. Joan Allen is for me maybe the finest actor I've ever worked with, and I would say she is that person, but 20 years later, who is so refined that capacity that when you speak to Joan, and I'll talk about this in front of the gang because it's so interesting. When you talk to Joan, it's like when you direct Joan, it's like a 10-year-old's normally completely sort of oversimplified idea of what it is to direct an actor. Like, in other words, you say, oh, that was really interesting, but what would it be like if we did it like this? And maybe what if she felt it a little bit more like this? You know, you say, it's almost like be angrier or try it sadder. The stuff that you're not supposed to say as a director, right? Doesn't matter, because Joan just goes, okay. And then she like plants that somewhere in some extraordinary way, and then it grows fully. She walks in, it's absolutely inhabited. She's not pretending, she's really feeling it. And then cut, and she shakes it right off. So it's that lightness, that capacity to go in. I think one way that an actor can cultivate that is maybe to do the big methody work, to sort of, and to get used to going in and out of it. The more you do it, the lighter the more you own it, the more confident you are that you can step away from it and still find it again. You know, I think that's that capacity to sort of inhabit and walk away is a really, really great thing to be able to cultivate.